Hello there, and welcome back to my channel. This week I've been painting a Warlord Games Samurai, and if you want to paint along with me, here's a small list of the paints, or full list of the paints that I've been using. You can pause the video and make a list of the paints if you want to paint along at the same time. And here's our Samurai. This Samurai is a model from the Masked Men expansion from the Test of Honor series that Warlord Games had done not so long ago. And I'm going to start off with the skin tones. It's always nice to start with the base. I normally, when painting figures, start with the skin tones first and then build up the colours from there. So I'm going to start with a nice thin base coat of tanned flesh. This is going to cover all of the face, his nice bald head, and all of his hands and arms. Up to the sleeves, of course. This is a metal model, and I've base coated, or primed the model rather, in a grey primer, so that the colours aren't too bright and aren't too dark. I tend not to prime with black normally, because it can take too many layers to build your colour back, but sometimes you can lose a bit of detail. I'd prefer to stick to a nice mid-tone grey or a light white primer. That way when you're painting your colours tend to pop a little bit more and stand out a little bit more. As you see, I'm just running a nice thin coat of this tan flesh across the whole face, just across the back of the neck. As I said, put it to the hands and arms as well. I don't want to forget those hands. It's a nice good base coat, tan flesh. It's a nice sort of darkish tone to begin with. You're going to move on to the shade. Put a nice light coat of Raglan Flesh shade. Raglan Flesh shade is my go-to shade when it comes to doing skin tones. I find that it has a real nice warmth to it, so your flesh sort of tones down in a nice way. I put way too much on this this brush. You want to be a lot more controlled than I was with this bit. But normally, if I've put too much on the front, I'll manipulate it a little bit and try to move it around so that it doesn't pool in any one particular area. So don't worry about that, I would have fixed that. But we want to try and keep it nice and thin. You don't want to put too much on your model and then dull down all your details. But yes, as I say, Raglan Flesh shade is my go-to. It's my favourite shade when it comes to skin tones. It can be used on a number of different colours, and it does add a lot of warmth to the shading, so it doesn't darken your model down too much. So once we've got our shade and it's all dried up, you're going to go back and just rebuild the highlights then with your tan flesh again. So if you want to paint up the arms, the fingers, but leaving the shade in those cracks. You're going to make sure that you're doing the nose, the forehead, the chin, cheekbones, these sorts of things. So the only thing we're going to really leave out is things like the recesses in the eyes, the ears, where the shade will be keeping that tone lower. And what we're going to do, we're going to push that highlight up again. So we've put that now as the tan flesh. We're going to move on to the Barbarian Flesh by Army Painter, and this one we're going to move on to just hit those edges a little bit harder so that it lightens up in a nicer fashion. So again, we're hitting the knuckles, the hand, the forehead, down the bridge of the nose, the chin, the cheekbones, these sorts of parts that when the model is on the table or on your shelf, obviously the light is going to catch it and show off that brightness. So there we go, that's our skin tones, and our skin tones are complete. As you see, I've also done his little bald head as well. So it's nice to have a lighter shade up on top as well, because again, when that light on your model on the table is there, it's going to look really nice. So we're going to move on to the trousers, the armour and the sleeves. For these we're going to use a little bit of a mixture of colours. We're going to start off with his trousers with the Vallejo Sky Grey. This grey is very, very nice. It's very light. That's the one thing to notice. This is very, very, very light. So it's almost like a white or an off-white as such. I like this grey because when you tone it down with a shade, when you put the grey back on, you have quite a nice contrast between the light and dark already before you even hit the highlights. And I do paint this grey for the white parts of my Romans, which I'll show in another video. Don't forget the sleeves. Make sure to cover the sleeves on the trousers as well. As you can see, that's how we should. But so we're moving on to the armour a moment. This is with a Citadel paint. This is also one of my favourite paints. This is Mephiston Red. Mephiston Red is surprisingly good mid-tone red. It can be darkened down quite nice, but it can also be highlighted very, very nicely as well. It's really, really good mid-tone. All we want to do is just try to paint up all of the armour bits, so including a little bit across his chest. And that's where we should be. So the same with our red, Amethyst red, we're just going to go across the greaves, across the front of the legs. Be careful not to get this onto the grey, the sky grey. That sky grey as well is covering his feet and just behind the greaves at the back as well, so you don't want to paint any of that on there. And then we're going to shade the armour and the trousers with Null Nile from Citadel. So this is a black wash, very dark wash. So this is going to tone down our colours quite a lot, so we'll need to bring that back up in a second. Just try to make sure that you get this in the nice recesses, so just underneath the cloak where you can see the little stages of the armour. Just up there you go, just into the cracks and into the crevices between the armour and the cloak. And between his trousers and the cloak as well. Now, like I was saying, with the sky grey being so light, the Null Nile, although it's black, it doesn't take away the colour. So when we highlight it back up, you can see. But at the moment, we're going to highlight back up with the Mephiston Red. So we're just going to repaint the red back in the mid-tone. Just going to stick to the tips of these bits of the armour. Just going to bring that colour back up in the greaves as well. Now we're going to highlight that red. Mephiston Red works really well with a few different tones. Now this tone tends to go a little bit more warm, so this way that I'm doing at the moment is going to tone itself a little bit more slightly orange. So it gives you a little bit more warmth to your miniature, a little bit more warmth to the reds and the colours that you've got. So we're going to start with the Evil Sun Scarlet, and this is a light red. It looks a little bit orangey in the video, but it is a very light red. And what you can see with this, I'm trying to, or I'm painting straight lines, so that then I'm going to leave some lines from the Mephiston Red across the bottom, the underneath, to create that illusion of almost like bumps and lines in the armour. There you go, just like that. So the armour looks a little bit more like there's definition to it, so that it's not all one tone. Just like so. And with this one, we're just going to hit the edges of the two side parts of the armour here. And again, nice straight lines on the other greave. try to leave a little bit of a gap to create that illusion of depth as well. These red tones, these highlights, do dry lovely on top of each other. So it may look a little bit rough to begin with, but once it dries, it tones really, really nicely. So from there, we're going to just use a little bit of an edge highlight almost. Just pick out some of the real extreme highlights, the real edges across the front part of the armour, the edges of the two side parts of the armour. And then with this, we're going to continue with straight lines down the greaves as well. And what we're hoping to do is to create another level of depth to those parts of the armour, so it will allow you to have a good contrast between the darker parts and the lighter parts. You might want to take your time with this bit. And it's all trial and error. Sometimes you might hit it first time and think that that's perfect, and then another time you might think you need a little bit more work. That's okay. If you make mistakes, you can go back over it and repaint it. So, as an example, while painting this, I thought it looked really great, very, very thick, darker lines behind. And then I thought, rather the line be a little bit more subtle, and I go back and fill that in. Well, like I say, this will be a brilliant highlight tone on top of those reds. This won't detract from the red at all, it will allow that red to pop in the end. A little bit too much paint on my brush there, just clean up a little bit more of the excess. Trying to take nice straight lines, nice and easy, nice and slow. It's easier to build up more than it is to put too much in one go, make a mistake, and then try to take it away. So if it means that you've just got to slowly build up multiple layers, that's better than just putting too much onto your brush, too much onto the miniature, and then try and fix it later. So yes, going back to what I was saying about the first greave, those red lines in between are probably a little bit too thin. So we're gonna really sort of push this highlight now. So we're gonna push these lines a little bit more. Yes, like so. There you go. So we don't have too many, so that it doesn't look too thin and too wiry. This will look hopefully a little bit more. Yeah, there you go. I prefer to have those 3 chunks rather than loads and loads of little chunks, and it'll suit both sides anyway. So there we go, that's the armour part. We're going to highlight that sky grey again. So we're just going back over the sky grey that we did on the trousers originally. Now that the null oil has dried, what we want to do with this is just follow the pattern and try to avoid the recessed areas. So any areas where the null oil has pooled and created like a bit of a deeper tone to it, and just leave that there, so that again, like we did with the greaves, it creates that element of depth. So you get the folds in the cloth and things like that, as you'll see there. So moving on to the cloak, we're going to do the inside of the cloak. We're going to do this like a sort of grey tone. We're going to start with a citadel colour called the Fang, which is like a very grey blue, very dark grey. When you add your shade with this one, again it's a citadel, this one's a Dragonhof nightshade. Once you add this, making sure that there are only pools in the recesses and that you don't get the blue onto the red or grey that we've already painted, this is a very dark shade, so this will darken that Fang right down, which will give us a real nice contrasting shade. Just trying to make sure that the shade sits underneath the foam just at the top there as well. just making sure to cover the whole inside of the cloak. Being very careful of those sleeves, the trousers. You don't want to end up having to repaint or go back over bits. And now that the Dragunov has dried, we're going to repaint the fang back on top. So we're only picking up the raised areas and there's the raised edges, as you can see. Leaving that Dragunov, the nightshade, to darken the inner parts. And again, it's all about trying to create depth out of these folds. There's lots of different ways you can do this. Every painter's got their own sort of different and unique ways that they do these things. And mine is to kind of build up these folds, if you like, by highlighting the folds back in rather than toning it all down. So once we've gone around with the fang, you're going to add a highlight then with another Citadel colour. You're going to move on and just pick the very edges again. So trying to boost that fang up a little bit now, so it's almost like a mid-tone. This is a rust grey. Here we go, nice straight lines. See, trying to take my time, trying to give myself plenty of control on that brush. And again, just building those folds, so building that illusion of the cloth folding and the cloth flowing around as he's moving. It's quite a dynamic pose. This is a really nice metal figure considering. So like I say, all painting to these sort of cloaks in slightly different ways. Some people like little cross hatching or showing like they brush strokes and things like that. I've got like a sort of little cartoony kind of effect, so I like to keep the extreme darks as I build up those layers. So as we build in this mid-tone, because there will be a further highlight after this, you can see then that the extreme dark in between is almost a little cartoony, I guess. Trying to make the colours pop and make things nice and bright and light. I don't like to paint my miniatures too dark. It's all personal preference though, everyone's different, everyone's got different views, different ways of painting, different things they prefer. There we go again, just building those straight lines, trying to keep a little bit of control, not going too extreme. And as you see, we got that real nice darkness in that cloth fold right there, that's nice. So, like I say, there's going to be another highlight, and this one is a Fenrisian Grey from Citadel. Now this one is going to be a little bit more extreme than the previous, so we only want to try and catch the edges more than anything. We don't want to go to town and really sort of overdo this one. This one's more of, like I say, an edge highlight, something that you can just pick out the edges of those folds. Yeah, just like that. Again, controlled, nice straight lines. Nothing too extreme. Not putting too much on the model itself. Run this right across the edge, just so we can almost like their edge across one end. With a lot of your edge highlighting, it is easier to just use the side of the brush to just gently drag that edge of your brush across the edge of the miniatures, and paint will just sit right across the very end. There you go, see, that's quick little lines. That's our extreme highlight on top of that extreme dark you've got in that big fold and right through there. So we're going to use the same techniques that we just used on the inside of the cloak or on the outside of the cloak, and we're going to use a couple of different colours for this one. So first of all, we're going to cover the cloak in a Citadel Zandri dust, which is a sandy sort of colour. You could use a Vallejo khaki colour, it's exactly the same, or very, very similar rather. Zandri dust is a very, very nice tone as well. This does have a lot of room to play about with in terms of darkening, highlighting. It's quite a nice colour. What we want to do is just cover the whole cloak, not just the bottom but the top half as well, where you can see the grey sleeve has just come up. We've got this overcoat just over the top as well, and that's what it should look like when he is completely covered. So using that bone white Vallejo, I'm just going to paint the hilt of the sword. I did make a mistake and touch a little bit of his knuckles there, but with a little bit of water I do remove that off camera, so don't worry too much. Again, like I say, if you make a mistake, just a slightly damp brush can remove the paint, because the paint is already watered down as we use thin coats anyway. So just going to paint the staff and the sheath of the sword with a Dryad Bark. Dryad Bark is actually one of my favourite paints as well. Dryad Bark is a fantastic base colour. You can actually build up on top of Dryad Bark with multiple different browns to get lots of different effects. Dryad Bark as a base coat is incredibly good for doing leathers and leather colours, because it tends to have a really nice deep contrasting dark effect to it. So I'll show you that in a different video at some other point. But for now, we're just going to finish off doing the sheath here. Cursor being left-handed again. And then we're going to cover it with a shade of Citadel Agrax Earthshade. So this is a very brown shade, and this one we just want to keep onto the back of the cloak. We don't want this to go on the inside of the cloak, because the inside with all of the blues and greys that we've just done is complete. So with this Agrax, I'm just going to follow the tone of follow the pattern of the cloak really, so try to follow the lines with the cloak. Again, I put a little bit too much on, but I tend to, because of the cartoony style, I tend to allow my shade to pool to some extent in extremities, because then it gives a nice extreme sort of contrast, like I say, a nice dark point. So once you've shaded it, go back and follow the lines. So this is kind of like the dot to dot stage. What we're doing is we're following the flow of the cloak, but you just want to leave the areas where the shade is pooled the most, and then you're also, by doing so, creating that flow, creating those folds again. So the illusion of the fold is created. There you go. As you can see with the bottom, I followed the cloak around and just left those points. Just show you what I mean on the top here. Again, it's quite a dynamic pose, so you're getting a lot of folds and a lot of flow in as this miniature seems to be poised and ready to defend himself. And like I said before, build those tones up. So less is more, and just keep building. Instead of putting too much, just keep building this tone, because this is going to be your sort of mid-tone now. From there, we're going to use a Vallejo Green Ochre. So this one is a little bit similar to the Xandra Dust or a khaki, but it's got a slight different tone to it. It's got a little bit of a lightness to it, almost like a lighter green, lighter yellow. So we're going to just pick out some of the highlights with this, because this is quite similar in its tone. When it dries, it's not going to be hugely noticeable, but from a distance, because it does pick out some of those highlights, you will notice that your model will stand out by having it. So it's better to have it than not. And again, just follow those lines of the cloak. Take your time, build it up. You could be quite free with this, you know, you can use like different styles, different textures. You can really go to town with how you want to paint it. So just follow those lines. Picking up the highlighting edge. There you go. You can see that the Vallejo tone is giving it a little bit of a highlight. So what I'm doing now is doing a very, very fine pin highlight. So I've got a very, very small brush here. I think I'm using like a 00 size brush, and I'm using the it's actually a Vallejo bone white, not a Citadel bone white. I made a mistake on my video there. And I'm just picking out some of the real extreme highlights. Now with this, you don't have to go around the whole model. Just pick bits maybe around the belt area and things like that. Less is more with this, because when you look at this model on the table, it's going to look fantastic with just a few little pin highlights rather than covering the whole model. So we're just going to move on and do some of the small areas now, so a little bit more details. So we've got our Retributor armor from Citadel to do the golden parts of the sword, which is the just the very end of the handle, and just going to do the hilt here as well. You could as well, if you wanted to, and you wanted to get creative, put sort of like a pattern down the down the sword, down the scabbard. I haven't done for this video. This video is long enough without patterns on swords as well. And gently, just using the flattest part of the brush that I can, just trying to pick out those raised highlights of raised edges on the armor. You don't really want to use the tip of your brush. You want to try and use the flatter area and just run that gently across. If you use the tip of your brush, you may not have the same level of detail or control that you would expect. So like I was saying about the Dryad bark on the staff being a good base tone, from there now we're going to paint this back up. So we're going to go to a Army Painter Monster Brown, which is quite a nice light brown. Again, good for leathers and things like that. I tend to use this as a highlight for staves, sticks, things that tend to be quite wooden because of the lightness to it. It has a really nice quality, a really nice glow to it. There we go, staff. Same thing with our Monster Brown. We're just going to try and pick out the very tips and edges of those beads. And the beads going around his neck, I also did a base coat of Dryad bark on as well. As you see, again, trying to use a flat area of the edge of the brush, or a flat area towards the tip of the brush, to just try to drag that across so that you're just picking up the highlights, almost in effect a little bit like dry brushing. You want to try and just pick those edges, but without using the tip of your brush, because you could end up pushing it into the center. And there he is, one samurai, all painted and ready for the board. As always, my friends, thank you very much for tuning in. Thank you for watching, and thank you for your support. Have fun painting.